Okay, so Leica has recently released a new M camera, and it's a camera that had been rumored in the community for quite a while now, and it's actually pretty much just a Leica M11, but instead of a good old rangefinder, it does have an electronic viewfinder. And judging by how it looks, it's probably fair to say that that viewfinder is pretty much straight taken from the Leica Q3 and shoved into the body of an M11, which is also probably why the entire camera, which is called the Leica M EV1, kind of looks like the love child from the Leica M and the Leica Q camera. Now, right out of the gate though, I don't have a Leica M EV1 and I also didn't get a chance yet to test it. And so if you want to have, or if you want to get some first-hand hands-on experience, sorry, this is not the video for you. But since I grew a large chunk of my audience with videos about the Leica Q, or rather the Q2 in my case, which I've used for over 4 years now, and since I've also recently bought the Leica M11P, and I've made a good number of videos about that camera as well. I had a few people ask me about my thoughts on the Leica M EV1 and whether or not I will buy one and so on and so forth. And so this video is pretty much just me sharing my thoughts on this new camera release for those who care, all 7 of them. So the M EV1. Most videos that I've seen about the M EV1 so far seem to be hitting all of the marketing points that Leica wants to get across, and for a good reason, obviously. Points like that it makes the Leica M line more accessible to people who maybe have issues with their eyesight and they can't use a true rangefinder for focusing. And that is great, obviously, but luckily right now that is not an issue that's concerning me. And so what I want to talk about is whether or not this camera is interesting for me, for my use cases, and what I think is good about it, what hopes I had for this camera, and also what concerns and reservations I have in regards to this camera. And at the end, I want to give you a conclusion and pretty much tell you what my opinion is about this new release right now. And so let's just dive in, shall we? And first, I want to talk about the concerns that I have in regards to this camera. And let's just address the elephant in the room straight away. Once you remove the rangefinder from the M11 or M11P and instead you add an electronic viewfinder like you get in the Leica Q series cameras, you end up with just a mirrorless camera. And the main issue here, if you ask me, is that there are many mirrorless cameras out there, and if you're honest, most of the ones that I can think about, even the ones that are using the same type of rangefinder layout, something like a Sony A7CR, which also uses probably exactly the same sensor, at least it also has 60 megapixels, that camera is a far superior camera in most regards. And by that, I mean that it is more versatile, it has a more versatile screen, it has probably better ergonomics by most people's standards anyway. It has in-body image stabilization, it has a video mode, and so on and so forth. And now you can say, yeah, but the other one is a Leica, you can use it with Leica M lenses, but that's true with the Sony as well. Just grab an adapter, they are super cheap if you have Leica M lenses laying around, and it's pretty much the exact same thing. And so obviously the Leica M EV1 is a better looking camera, but it costs more than twice as much, at least here in Germany. And also the fact that it's better looking, isn't that just vanity? And so yeah, the first gut reaction that I had when this camera was released was that you really have to twist yourself into a pretzel to justify why anyone would spend the kind of money that you have to spend to buy something like the Leica M EV1 when you pretty much get an inferior camera for twice the price. With the Leica M11P, you can at least justify it in the way that it's a very unique shooting experience. And if you like that shooting experience and you like everything else about the M camera experience, and you have the money, then yeah, sure, why not? It's an incredible amount of fun to use this rangefinder. But if you only have an electronic viewfinder, it's pretty much the same as you get everywhere else. And also, as a Leica M11P user, I am usually able to nail focus when I'm using the rangefinder patch. However, let's say about 30 to maybe even 50% of the time when I use the LCD screen with focus peaking to focus my shots, and especially when I need to get that critical focus right because I'm shooting wide open, my hit rate really isn't too impressive at all. I don't know what it is for whatever reason. I think I'm doing everything right with the focus peaking, but for whatever reason, even though it shows that the shot should be in focus, they just aren't. And that's been an issue since the day that I got this camera. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but I've read from other people that they have similar experiences. Maybe it's the algorithm for focus peaking that Leica uses, and maybe that's not an issue with the M EV1. But since it is an issue with the M11P I have here, I have some reservations. And so I guess you could argue that the moment that you remove the rangefinder from the M11 and you add an EVF, you kind of get the worst of both worlds, really. You get manual focusing, but not with the fun and engaging experience that you get with a true rangefinder, but with the kind of annoying and sometimes not all that reliable experience that you have when you're using focus peaking. And who wants that, really? All that, mind you, without the option to also use autofocusing lenses, and again, also without the benefits of having something like IBIS in your camera. But even though all of that probably sounded kind of negative, truthfully, I actually like the M EV1 in many ways. And I think there are many positives about it that would justify the purchase if you are in the market for this kind of camera. And so let's talk about my hopes and what I like about this camera. In order to understand that, though, you have to understand what I love about the M11P aside from using the rangefinder. And what I like most about this camera is how it looks, how it feels, and how compact the lenses are. This is an insanely small setup, considering that this is a full frame body with a 28mm lens in this case with an f1.5 maximum aperture. That is tiny. That's just a tiny, tiny, tiny setup, and it's so elegant, and the results that you can get are insane. And really, you maintain all of those benefits with the M EV1. You remove the rangefinder, but with the electronic viewfinder, obviously, you also get some benefits, like the fact that this rangefinder really only works best for your standard focal lengths, like 28mm, 35mm, 50mm, and everything that's wider or beyond that, in the sense of longer lenses. I mean, it's possible, but it's not great. I do have a 90mm lens for this camera and I use it occasionally, but it's not the most enjoyable process to use it. Whereas if you have an electronic viewfinder, you could use all types of lenses. Wider lenses like 21mm lenses, the Leica Tri-Alma with the 16, 18 and 21mm focal length, and also stuff like this 90mm lens, even the Leica Tele, that is a 135mm lens, which is still fairly compact, and you could really use that lens with the electronic viewfinder, whereas it's not quite as enjoyable, I would think, with this rangefinder patch. And also, even though I just said that I usually nail focus with the rangefinder patch and that I usually miss focus when I use focus peaking, you can also use magnification, and so you can just punch in with the electronic viewfinder and check your focus that way. And that's probably what I would do, and that would probably also work pretty well in most situations. Yes, that might slow you down, but it would probably work. And again, you could also do that and probably be better at focusing your shots, especially when you're using stuff like longer lenses, like a 90mm lens, like a 135mm lens. That's really tough to nail focus with this rangefinder patch, whereas it would probably be a rather simple task if you had an EVF and you could just punch in and use that magnification. And so with that, I think that makes the entire M camera a lot more versatile to use, because truthfully, with this Leica M11P, even though I could use it with different lenses as well, usually I just use it with a 28, 35 and 50mm lens. Now that is not a big issue for me, because that standard range for focal lengths is kind of my preferred range overall anyway. But you know, sometimes I like the variety. Sometimes I would like to use a 21mm lens, and I would like to know how I can frame my shot. And that simply doesn't really work when I have no frame lines, or the frame lines are so far out on the edge of the frame that I can barely make them out. And again, the same is also true at the other end, where I really don't enjoy the process of using my 90mm lens with this rangefinder patch. And so I guess you could also argue that you're kind of getting the best of both worlds here. You're still getting small, compact M lenses, and you don't have to use an adapter like you do with like a Sony a7CR. You still get a camera that's insanely good looking, that probably feels nice, all that without the drawbacks of having to use a rangefinder patch. So that makes, again, the camera a lot more versatile. And also, and that's a point that I think Cam McKay made in his video about the M EV1, the electronic viewfinder is probably a good bit more rugged than the rangefinder. The rangefinder has a lot of mechanical parts that can go wrong and that might have to be readjusted if you're using it in like a rough environment. Whereas with the electronic viewfinder, you probably won't face those kinds of issues. And so where does that leave us? Well, for me, I can say that I am interested in this camera. However, with that said, I already have the M11P and I love that camera to bits, and I love using the rangefinder as well. And I would have to sell that camera to buy an M EV1, and that's just not going to happen. I don't want to sell my M11P, and I would have to sell it for a loss and then probably also still put some money on the table to be able to afford the M EV1. And so that's just not going to happen. With that said, had I not bought the M11P earlier this year, I would seriously consider buying the M EV1 over the M11. Because first of all, it's cheaper. Secondly, for somebody who is coming from a Leica Q camera, it might make the step or the transition from a Leica Q series to a Leica M series camera a lot smoother overall. And so I guess at the end of the day, Leica has just broadened the menu to serve every kind of appetite that might be out there. For those who are really just into the looks of a Leica camera, but really they want a modern camera, they can go with the Leica SL series cameras or with the Leica Q series, and they get all of the bells and whistles like modern autofocusing, video shooting, image stabilization, and so on and so forth. That's great. If you want to go one step more towards the, let's say, more analog experience, you can get a Leica M EV1 now, which has no autofocusing, but it still has that electronic viewfinder and that familiar mirrorless kind of feel to the camera when you're using it, when you're using the electronic viewfinder. Then one step further, you get this M11 or M11P or M11D, whatever it may be. You get pretty much the exact same experience, or a very similar experience that you would get with an analog film camera, but while also shooting a digital image. And so you get all of the benefits of still having that digital sensor. And if you want to go one step beyond that, you get the MP or the re-released M6, and you get that full analog true film experience, because it is just that. It doesn't get a whole lot more analog than that. And they even have the Leica MA, which is one step beyond that, because as far as I understand, it does remove even the light meter, so you get pretty much no electronics in the camera at all. In my opinion though, there is still a spot open for Leica to fill, and that spot would be a digital rangefinder camera that is modern. So essentially like a Q series, but with an interchangeable lens mount that also allows you to use autofocusing lenses, and that also does have in-body image stabilization. I would really love it if Leica would go for a rangefinder alternative to the Leica SL, so a rangefinder style camera with an electronic viewfinder that uses the L mount, but I guess let's wait and see if that's ever going to happen. I would personally love it, but again, we'll see about that. So yeah, speaking for myself, for now, I'm going to stick with my M11P because I still love it. But that said, had I not gone for the M11P earlier this year, I would probably, most likely, not 100% sure, but highly likely go for the M EV1 instead. And then maybe that's sort of the next kind of gateway drug, if you like, that funnels people towards a more analog experience, that funnels them towards the M11 and then perhaps into the area of film cameras. But that's all I got for you today. I hope this was interesting to you. Sorry for all of the rambling, but I will have a more scripted and back to basics video for you next week. Until then, take good care. Bye.